Welcome to Disrupt the Drift. I am Baron Baptiste. Welcome you all. We wanted to talk to you today. Wanted to have a conversation about what takes you out, whether as an entrepreneur, as a human being with other people. What takes you out in what people get into is comparison, comparing themselves to others, and competition. Like, where does competition fit in? Where is it healthy? Where is it not? David, how you doing?
Fantastic. And again, it's always wonderful when we hang out.
Yeah. So, as an entrepreneur, like I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I learned that my parents were entrepreneurs. I just watching my father, he was a restaurateur in San Francisco. He had a health food restaurant, health food store. He had gyms. He was an early bodybuilder, and he was actually Mr. America. I don't know if he knew that, but
Yeah, I
early
did.
on. And so he started opening gyms, and he scaled several like gymnasium type fit. In those days, back in the 50s, they called it something like more like gymnasiums, or it was such a new kind of phenomena, and no one knew what it was. People thought that kind of stuff was weird. And then it was just, wasn't popular culture back then to work out, to train your body. And then eventually got into yoga and more Eastern teachings, and he integrated health and bodybuilding and yoga and eating healthy. And he created this whole kind of program. And I watched my dad do this over a lot of years, and it just got ingrained in me to be what it took to be an entrepreneur. I grew up around it, lived it. And then it fast forward. So the last 30 years or so, I built a global brand, global enterprise where we train trainers, and I'd be out there as the ambassador for my company and brand in the world, Baptiste yoga trainings and like that. And I learned a lot about what it took, but I also saw how others were working they put their work in the world, and they were very competitive. And I never had a competitive spirit. It didn't drive me. I wasn't paying attention to what other people were doing. I was, in a sense, competing with myself. Every time I would show up to teach a class or a workshop or a training or putting products out, I was always focused just on what I was doing. And what everyone else was doing was just not on my radar. And what I learned from that was that eventually what everyone else is doing just goes away. Competition actually goes away. People can even compete with what I was doing because what I was doing was so unique, because I wasn't looking around at what everyone else was doing and trying to do that. I wasn't reactive in that sense. I was inventing something that made sense to myself, that I would take things that had benefit to me, and then I would integrate them into what I was offering to people, but in a unique, just authentic way. And it didn't really have it didn't matter to me what others were doing. But then I started seeing, at a certain point, I'd pull my head up from the trees and see people were competing with me. I wasn't competing with them. And in a weird way, I was like dominating the market, because my classes or studios or things I was putting out in the world was just so unique. I didn't need to pay attention to what anyone else was doing, but I was dominating the market in a sense, not by intention, but by default. But what do you see about competition and
You know,
comparison too? Yeah.
yeah, let's look at the word compete. And this is the root of the word. From the 1600s, it says to enter or to be put in rivalry with. Now, that's a common
Mm-hmm.
understanding of competition, but it gets a little more interesting. It goes on to say, or directly from the late Latin, to strive in common, or to strive after something in company with or together. Now, here's the thing, you can make competition like two people jousting, and you have these big jousting sticks, and you try to knock the other person off the horse and impale them.
They're a
Or
threat. Yeah.
or you can enter into what you would call a friendly rivalry, which most people don't do, by the way. Um, business is a continuation of war by other means. And so in business, all or most people who are in a competitive world want to do is knock the other guy off his horse and impale him, and male or female. And so I think that competition it can be very healthy, but it can also be super destructive. I think one example is Steve Jobs. He got absorbed in a competition with Bill Gates, and he died at a very early age. I think he was 52 or 3 years old when Steve
Mm-hmm.
Jobs died of pancreatic cancer. It ate him up. And my understanding was that Bill Gates had actually stolen some of the data or some of the information
Yeah.
that allowed him to create Windows and all the rest of it from Steve Jobs. Don't think that it's healthy for people to get into that mindset of trying to destroy each other in order to grab the ring. I think working together with people, and in other words, if you have somebody that's a super competitor with you, try to find a way to find a common ground with them, and don't use all of your energy just to win, because that really isn't the spirit of competition, in my opinion. And as a surfer, my friends used to tell me, why don't you enter surfing contests? And I said, because I don't believe the best person necessarily wins every time. I think the people that show off for the judges and they jump through the hoops are the ones that win the contest, but they're not necessarily the best surfers. And so there's something about an honest and healthy competition, as opposed to one who strives only to win and does anything necessary in order to achieve that. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that the word that comes to mind is excellence. I think that if watching the Olympics or you watch these phenomenal athletes,
Mm.
I worked on the coaching staff with the Philadelphia Eagles for 5 or 6 years, and watching these athletes compete, it in a sense they're competing with themselves. When you really watch, are they aware of what the other athletes or players are doing? Yes. But at the end of the day, they have to compete with themselves and pull out and train themselves and develop themselves in excellence, the discipline, the what it takes in mindset, commitment, showing up and refining your technique, refining your skills, becoming more skillful, becoming a master in what you do. And then you start, if you have it, and maybe there's, who knows, some luck in there or different, certainly in athletics or sport, you have genetics, but there's something, it's more than genetics, because there's something in the mindset of the greatest ones that of excellence. They're striving for excellence, and in a way they're competing with themselves. And I like what you say about others, because you see in that environment they have coaches, people that are have an external eye to also give direction, to refine skill set and mastery of whatever it is you're doing. But you're in a process of developing excellence. And at the end of the day, that doesn't have anything to do with others. It doesn't. Because in competition, there's some other definition. It's in the root word of competition. I forget from Latin to English, but it has something to do with bringing forth. In competition, it brings forth, it draws forth greatness, it draws forth excellence, it draws forth your optimizing your potential. And I think there's something in competition where okay, now translated over to business. Yeah, in being in different, you and I were talking earlier about working with different corporations or businesses. And some businesses are very focused on what their competition is doing. They're aware of that. And in a way, they need to be, because the competition also, they're all stealing from each other. And they're also watching, okay, what's selling in the marketplace, what isn't, what's working, what isn't. So they look to each other through that lens. And maybe that's not all bad. But I think when they become obsessed with the competition, it starts to create a malignancy. It starts to create a dark mind where you don't necessarily, you're now not competing for uniqueness and creating that's one thing Steve Jobs had, is this creative side and a uniqueness and a focus, almost like an obsession on how to bring forth the best product in the world, but a unique product that no one else was doing. Yeah, go ahead.
Steve Jobs, in an interview, admitted that most of his greatest ideas came through meditation.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's very cool.
I heard it with my own ears.
Yeah.
And he was a deep meditator. Not the kind of meditation that you and I do, but still, meditation can open doorways to possibilities. And I wanted to mention, as you were saying, just what you were saying, that I read a book back in 2000, I think I read 8 or 9. It's called The Body Has a Mind of Its Own, How Body Maps in Your Brain Help You Do Almost Everything Better. And I just want to read a little bit of the description, because when I read this book, I thought, okay, now everything makes sense.
What book is it?
It's called Your Body Has a Mind of Its Own. Listen to this. This is science. Your body has a mind of its own. It's true. You can sense it. Even though it may be hard to articulate, you know that your body is more than a vehicle for your brain to cruise around in. But how deeply are mind and body truly interwoven? Now, that's a great question. Answers can be found in the emerging science of body maps. Just as road maps represent interconnections across the landscape, your many body maps represent all aspects of your body self. Your self doesn't begin and end with your physical body, but it extends into the space around you. Now, this is the thing that blew my mind, because as a surfer, as a snowboarder, I always wondered, how do I adjust? In other words, and you were talking about excellence. Okay, the more you do something, and this is the power of doing, the more your body and your mind work together to create that excellence.
Yeah, very good. There was some study. I don't know if it was through Harvard or somewhere, but repetition is the mother of mastery. And if to master something, you do it like, is it 10,000 hours, something like that. But I think it's more than that. It's not just doing something, because we've all done a lot of things in our lives for 10,000 hours or more.
Oh yeah,
especially as you get older.
Really worrying.
But yeah, all that. And you're creating these habits, and then you have these habits that are forming you and informing you and making you and result in something. But it's doing something in repetition over time, but changing the iterations, distinguishing it newly, refining what you're doing. You've got something pulling you, something that's bigger than oneself. Creatively, there's something pulling you that you are moving toward. And I'll use the word excellence again, but you're refining it's not just doing something for 10,000 hours over and over, but it's doing something in repetition over many years perhaps, but you're distinguishing, you're refining, you're evolving, you're bringing those creative resources. I love that you pointed to Steve Jobs as a meditator, because there's something about meditation, that getting quiet, getting still, and you get connected to a very natural creative source that we all have within us. And then that intuition and that gut sense that as you follow that creative force with that inner knowing, it's leading you up to something bigger than yourself. But it's not just doing something in repetition. It's a certain way of looking at something where you're refining it, like any great scientist, right?
Look,
or how
there are mysteries, and for me, there are mysteries that I want to solve before the end of my life. And one of those mysteries is there's so much more to us that most people don't ever even have a sense of.
Yeah.
And so when I started reading this book, The Body Has a Mind of Its Own, I'm not trying to promote the book, because I'd rather people read The Present, which is my book. But I want to read to you this because it actually makes everything make more sense. It says, Your self doesn't begin and end with your physical body, but extends into the space around you. When you drive a car, your personal body space grows to envelop it. When you play a video game, your body maps automatically track and emulate the actions of your character on screen. If your body maps fall out of sync, and this is what you're talking about, you may have an out of body experience or see auras around other people. The body has a mind of its own explains how you can tap into the power of body maps to do almost everything better: play tennis, strum a guitar, ride a horse, dance a waltz, empathize with a friend, raise children, cope with stress, feel ill. Uh, anyway, my point is this is so important because when you get quiet long enough, you begin to realign. And this is why we're all out of sync. And athletes, when they're trying to do their best, do they overthink it? And does overthinking produce a better result? Or does stepping back from it and learning how to be objective produce a better result? Because then you can do some critical thinking about where you'd like to go, what you'd like to change, what you're doing or not doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my point.
It's the Michael Jordan, probably the greatest basketball player in history.
Right.
He would watch every game. After every game, he would watch the tape, the video of his performance. He would watch, and what he was looking for, though, is what was missing. He would look for where he was missing the mark. He would look for the nuances and the subtleties in what he was. He wasn't looking for, all the great plays he was doing and all the things that were working. He was looking for what wasn't working or limiting him. And I think that it takes I'll say a champion type mind, but it takes a mind that is in discovery, like curiosity. It's not like you've arrived. I think there's that, I always used to say at my trainings, when the moment you think you've arrived, you get squashed like a bug. It's being in this ongoing process of curiosity, of discovery, but with excellence in mind. And the bigger people I know, whether in business or entrepreneurs, they're not focused on comparison of what others are doing. They're not focused on just competing. But in a way, that's where I call it, you're competing with yourself, but it's more than just competing with yourself. You're in a process of looking at yourself. How can I do it better? How can I up level? How can I refine what I'm doing in relationship to something bigger, something greater, what I like to call true north alignment? You're lining up to true north. You're being pulled towards something bigger. You're being pulled or directed. You have inner direction or inner guidance. But it comes down to just personal development. If you want to develop yourself, it's the same kind of thing. You have to say, I'm overreactive over here, or I'm not listening to these people over there, or I'm not present right here. It's always looking, what's missing? What am I not doing that I could be doing? And if I was doing it, it would make a difference in how I show up for myself, with myself, and for others in the world. And I think whether you take it from the self or if it's something you're putting out into the world, it takes that kind of refinement and the willingness. The ego does not like to be wrong. The ego doesn't want to look at its flaws or what is. So it takes something, when I say a bigger person, you have to be willing to look at where you're missing the mark. And that's the word sin, right? The word sin.
That's right.
The real translation of the word sin is missing the mark.
Right.
So looking at life and I work with a lot of younger entrepreneurs. I've been doing a lot of speaking and public speaking over the last couple of years, just with groups of entrepreneurs and business people. But what I see, the default with a lot of younger entrepreneurs, is they're so in this comparison trap to what are other people doing out there. And then they either try to copycat that and compete with that, but they're not tapping the genesis of their own potential.
Everybody has an original potential that they
Yeah.
don't know how to tap into because they don't understand any of the dynamics that are involved in tapping into it. It's spoken about in the scripture. Be still and know. But most people don't even have any concept of what it means to get quiet for a moment because their mind is
Yeah.
constantly throwing,
Oh man, the world.
fastballs at them. So I want to make a
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
When I first started snowboarding, it was the most frustrating experience I ever had. And I was a surfer for many years. I started surfing when I was like 12 years old. I knew how to surf. I was very good at surfing. But snowboarding, there was different dynamics involved. And I fell and I cursed and I got up and I tried again. But what happened was at a certain point, I let go of the effort of based upon other principles. Like you can't snowboard based upon the principles of surfing. It's totally different dynamics. When I started letting go, that exact thing started happening. My body started mapping the environment around me. And I started to be able to control the board. And this is for everybody. It starts when the child starts to walk. It doesn't apply effort into walking. It's a natural thing. Success is a natural thing if you are not in your own way. But the bigger picture is after a few years of snowboarding, I got better and better. I only fell a couple times when I was snowboarding over a period of 10 years. I only fell and hurt myself twice. And each time that happened, I learned something about what happened when I fell and why. But it went from being a frustrating experience on the easiest slopes to being a masterful experience on the highest slopes. And you
Yeah.
look at these guys that go up to Valdez, Alaska, and they go up to the top of a mountain, the top of the
Mm-hmm.
steepest mountain they could find. But here's what's happened. What happens is exactly the same thing, is that when you get into a situation where you're able to allow your body to expand into that space, now it's not just a car. Now it's not just a tennis court. Now it's a mountain. Now we're talking about these guys that ride 100-foot waves.
Yeah.
But their body map has taken them out into this realm of potential that no one would ever say, how can you survive such a thing?
Yeah.
It's even hard enough to ride a 10-foot wave, let alone a 100-foot wave.
Yeah. No, I like it that you're talking about surfing. Yeah. I started surfing when I was around 8 years old.
Yeah.
And in San Francisco. And so I grew up in that surf culture as you did down in Ventura, right?
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
So surfing in San Francisco, it was considered one of the most challenging places to surf in the world
Yeah.
because of the strength. It's cold water, that Northern California, the strength of the ocean and the waves. It had a lot of force. Like Hawaiians, these big wave surfers would come over from Hawaii and surf at Ocean Beach, and they were like, whoa, how do you do this? They were great over in Hawaii. They'd come over to where we were and they would struggle. But here's my point about the competition piece. So we had on that Northern California coast, you go south a little bit to Santa Cruz. It's about an hour and 15 minutes from San Francisco. Santa Cruz, there were a lot of competitive surfers. They were in that competitive world of surfing and they would compete. But my little grommet friends, when we were teenagers, we were little badasses who had no fear. We would go down to Santa Cruz. Those waves were so easy and gentle compared to what we developed in, which was
Right.
that more the harsher environments. But my posse of friends, we would load up in 5-car loads of us. We would go down south and to Santa Cruz and places like that, and we would surf with these competitive surfers, and we would outdo them. I wasn't the best surfer in my group, but I was good. And some of my friends were just phenomenal. But here's my point. We would go, even when there were competitions down there, we would outsurf all of these guys, just whether it's getting in tubes or just hitting the lips, all the different kind of tricks you do and stuff in surfing. We would outdo those guys, but we had a kind of pride that we're not going to compete with you guys. We're just going to outdo you guys. Mm-hmm. And it was like, and sometimes going down there, seeing all these competitors they were really good and they were great surfers, but we didn't play in that same game. We were just doing what we did, and we would do it better than a lot of what they were doing. And it was interesting because it fits into the mindset thing you're talking about here. We were just competing with ourselves, and we didn't need the recognition or in that competitive world. We weren't looking for that, but we sure had fun outplaying everybody else.
Here's a super important point that you just
okay,
brought
last
up.
point, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay, super important point is that it's more fun to do things with other people. But if you're trying to destroy them or they're trying to destroy you, that becomes a war. So it's like you could turn something that would be otherwise a great, wonderful day of healthy competition into I'm gonna beat you so that you can feel smaller and lower than me, and that's where it all goes sideways, in my opinion. And so
that's
one
where
more
the joy
thing,
gets squeezed out.
I want to promote my book.
Okay, the
My
present.
Book, yes, the
present,
and people can find it at escapeyourmindsprison.com.
Yeah, good. All right, you all. Thank you for listening. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel. The channel is Disrupt the Drift. If you're not there, if you're listening on audio, please give us a 5-star review. The show is growing. We're ranked in the top 2%. This Disrupt the Drift podcast is ranked in the top 2% in the world out of, I think, about 4 million podcasts out there. So that's pretty good. And that's all because of you all sharing the show, telling people about the show. It's how we grow. It's how we're growing and have grown. It's all through you organically. So thank you. If you want us to comment to a question, send it to disruptingthedrift@baronbaptiste.com. disruptingthedrift@baronbaptiste.com. Until next time, stay true, keep leveling up, and be bold, and keep disrupting the drift, and peace be with you.